The boroughs are New York City. The burbs are everywhere else. Real estate is the ultimate game of risk and reward. It's the biggest investment most people ever make. Fortunes are made over a lifetime and lost in a day. And we're not playing with monopoly money. How do you stay ahead? Who's buying? Who's selling? And why? What do they know? We want the truth. You need an edge. Boroughs and Burbs is your secret weapon, giving you the insider knowledge and strategies you need to succeed in the high-stakes world of real estate. From Palm Beach to Palm Springs, Manhattan to Malibu, we press the experts to expose the pain, find the deals, and occasionally predict the future. That's Boroughs and Burbs, Thursdays, 3 o'clock Eastern, noon Pacific. Because everyone can make money in real estate.
Welcome, everybody. Boroughs and Burbs, episode 160, The Gilded Age in New York. We have a very special guest today, Phillip James Dodd. Let me hit my share screen button. So there we are, boroughsandburbs.com. You'll find all the episodes from Dubai to election effects on real estate. I want to thank our sponsor, Grace Farms in New Canaan, 80 acres of calm and beauty and nature and art. Go check out Grace Farms and tell them Frank at the Tea House, tell them John and Roberto sent you. This is theengelteam.com. That's where you'll find me if you're looking for me. Here is my co-host, Roberto Cabrera. Say hello, Roberto.
Look at that face. Ooh, I'm good. How are you? How is everybody?
That's you delivering, important election-related real estate information.
So to speak, yes.
I think...
are you going to a formal event tonight? You don't have your jacket on, so you look a little different.
You don't like this?
No, it looks great.
I thought I would go more casual, no jacket.
Yeah, that's casual. Is that the way you wake up in the morning?
Yeah, this is how I wake up. No jacket.
He's actually in his pajamas, guys.
All right, we'll go back to Angry Roberto. That's Angry Roberto. You'll find him at robertocabrera.com, where you can either read his market report or you can click and watch his market report where he...
Yeah, there we go.
To find out the answer to that, you got to watch it. Today, we're talking to, where was he? Phillip James Dodd. Here he is on Instagram. I think I had his book. Let's see. This is his latest book, An American Renaissance, Beaux-Art Architecture in New York City. And he takes us through really, really beautiful photographs ranging from the Metropolitan Museum of Art to the Flatiron Building here. And I guess the library. But you know what? Without further ado, Phillip James Dodd, welcome. And why don't you tell us what's in the book?
Oh my gosh, where do I start? It's it's a big book, 412 pages. Took me 5 years to write. It's a big format as well, 14 by 11, and we actually have some pull-out pictures. I won't get into that, but it's like whenever you take this beautiful double-page symmetrical image in a book, it looks great on a computer screen, but in a book it gets lost in the fold of the gutter of the book. So we have some pull-outs so you don't have that happen, and we only feature 20 buildings. So when you've got 412 pages, it means buildings like the Frick Collection get about 30 pages, or University Club gets 30 pages as well. So for like 20 mini books within one book, and we do it kind of chronologically through the Gilded Age. So when you start off, you can see how the architecture changes from kind of the Victorian influences. In the middle, you get like the big kind of behemoths, the Metropolitan Museum, Grand Central Terminal, New York Public Library. And then towards the end, you get the kind of the more Art Deco inspired buildings like the New York Life Insurance Company building. And the foreword is written by Julian Fellows, the creator of Downton Abbey, and the show on HBO, The Gilded Age. And like Julian, I think the reason that he agreed to do the forward is my text is kind of, it's an architecture book, but it's not, because I tell stories. I am a big believer that the best way to tell history is through storytelling, rather than just giving, monotonous facts. And so you want to make history fun. You want these people to come alive. The people who commissioned the buildings, the people who designed the buildings. There's so many great stories. And, that's the great thing with his TV show. They're all real life stories. And for the most part, they're real life characters. And if they're fictitious, they're based on a particular person. So Carrie Coon's portrayal of Bertha Russell is actually based upon Alva Vanderbilt. And so it's all these stories are true, and that's what people love. Even if you don't like the show, you can still listen to the stories. And the show's been hugely popular in introducing this type of architecture to a much younger, broader audience who, quite frankly, didn't know these buildings were here.
Did you do the book because of the show, or
No.
did the show get invented because of your book?
So,
Is that an either or, John? Is that just an either or?
Yeah.
is this going to be like when I'm, in the jury? Answer yes or no. So I came to the States in the fall of 1996. And I came in a 1-year internship. I didn't know, I'd been offered a job. I didn't know anybody. I came with one suitcase and I was making $10 an hour, which meant I didn't have time or money to do anything at the weekends. So I just walked around Manhattan.
Now you're a successful architect making $10 an hour.
Yeah, making $12 an hour, maybe. Yeah. And I fell in love with all of these buildings. And so that's, oh my gosh, what's that, 20, over 20, almost 30 years ago now, 28 years ago. And then, I do, you do a few other books. And then I went to the publisher and I said, look, this is the book I've always wanted to do. And my other books have been much more kind of for the architectural kind of world, and developed a relationship with them. And they said, okay, go for it. And I realized I needed somebody famous to write the foreword. And Julian literally just finished Downton Abbey. And there was all these rumors flying that he would be doing an American version of Downton. And so I thought, well, that you'd be great. And so somehow I managed to reach out to him. And somehow he agreed to write the foreword. And then it was just very serendipitous that it took me 5 years to write the book, and it took him 5 years to finish what would be The Gilded Age and HBO. And so they both came out at the same time. Wasn't planned, just dumb luck and good luck. And what's happened is we're working on a new book now called The Mansions of the Gilded Age. And the race is to try and get that to be out next fall, because that's when season 3 of the TV show is probably going to come out. So it's good to align things, because you get a lot more press publicity. I get to do joint interviews with him. We did that with Architectural Digest and with the Associated Press. So if you can piggyback on his success, that's great. And
will those mansions be mansions in New York, or will they also be mansions that are like in Newport and North Carolina, things like that?
Yeah. So in this book that John's scrolling through, so the last book in American Renaissance, there was 20 buildings, 5 of them, and they're all in New York City. 5 of them were houses. And so when we started to work on this new book, that the idea was, well, they would all be kind of country houses instead. And basically, we got time. I'll regale you with the story here. It's kind of like Al Pacino in the Godfather. It's like I'm out, and then they pull you back in. I was like, I'm not doing another book. I'm done. And then I got asked out of the blue, and this is what Julian Fellows has been so kind and supportive. He didn't just write a foreword. He's gone out of his way to help promote the book and promote me in this side of what I do. And I got a phone call out of the blue from the people who run all the mansions up in Newport, the Newport Preservation Foundation Society. And they said, you know, we've got a problem. It's our big end of season event. It's the John G. Winslow lecture. We hold it inside the Breakers. And our speakers just had to cancel. She's one of the actors from the TV show, and she's had to cancel because of the actor strike. And they reached out to Julian, and he recommended me. So, which was pretty good, you know. And so I go up there, and it's the only time I've been nervous to give a talk. And I'm stood in the Great Hall, and there's like maybe 300 people there, and it's one of the great spaces in America. And I'm kind of thinking about, you know, coming here with one suitcase, and now I'm stood in this space, and somebody leans over to me, and they said, you know, JFK gave a speech from that same spot. And I was like, that is not helping with my nerves at all. Thank you very much. I could have killed the person. But afterwards, they have a dinner. And it's in the breakfast room of the Breakers, which is even more surreal. And the lady who runs the mansions, Trudy Cox, leans over to me and she said, that was fantastic. You know, you knocked it out of the park. We owe you a favor. And I don't know why. I just said, let us photograph the Breakers. I don't know what for yet. And she said, okay. And so that's how the idea of the new book that's coming out next year got started. It was like, okay, we've got the Breakers. How do we write a book around the Breakers? So we just started, we ended up photographing 3 houses in Newport, the Breakers, the Elms, which is where they film a lot of the TV show, and then another house called Shadow Samir. We've got 2 down in Florida, the Flagler Estate in Palm Beach, Whitehall, and then the Ringling Estate, Catazat in Sarasota, Swan House in Atlanta. The last one we just photographed, the last of the houses, is the Lars Anderson house in Washington, D.C. And we weren't going to do any urban houses. And then I gave a lecture about a year or so ago in Chicago at a place called the Driehaus Museum, which is just off the Magnificent Mile, and it's spectacular. And I came back from that, and I was like, well, we've got to put this in. And if we've got a house in Chicago then we've got to have a house in DC, and we've got to have a house in New York. And I was like, yeah, but we had all the good ones in the first book. You know, we had the Frick collection in the first book. We don't want to go back and do something we've already done. And I just happened to get a phone call from the Lotus Club in New York City, and which is in an old mansion. It's in the old Shefflin mansion, which is the Vanderbilt mansion. And they had heard me speak up in Newport and said, will you give that same talk here? And so I did. And then I asked them, I said, well, can we photograph this? Because it's a spectacular building.
Did they tell you that Teddy Roosevelt stood in that spot and he gave the same speech?
No, but by that time, I'm immune to those things. Now I'm fine.
So I want to understand the Gilded Age in New York. And it occurs to me that has great relevance beyond the TV show. The TV show has caused everybody to take notice of the Frick Mansion, the Metropolitan Museum, the Lotus Club, and be curious about that age. But it seems to me that it was a period of time when the great wealth of New York City decided that they would express their wealth and power in architecture. And for the most part, they decided to do it in New York City. And I'd like to try and understand why and how did they express themselves. Today, it seems to me there's a bit of a parallel in that the great wealth of New York and the architects of New York are expressing themselves with Billionaires Row, with taller buildings in order to make a statement. How was the great wealth of the Gilded Age making a statement in New York? Was it to make a bigger house, a fancier house, a more gilt house? What is the Gilded Age?
So From the short answer or the long answer?
The short
Um,
answer, and then we ask questions.
Well, the Gilded Age is, it's just a term that was coined by Mark Twain. So it's interpersonal with the term an American Renaissance. And depends who you talk to. If you talk to architectural historians or social historians, but for me, you're talking about an era that comes right after the Civil War, and it ends with the Great Depression. And so this is this era of coming out of the Civil War. There's just amazing industrialization going on. Technology is changing so fast in just one generation. You're entering this generation with people riding horses and everything is lit with kerosene lamps. And within one generation, you're building skyscrapers because all of a sudden we've got structural steel, which they didn't have before. So you start off the era, people are building load-bearing masonry houses. They can only build so tall because of the thickness of the stone. By the end of the New York Public Library took 15 years to build. The Frick collection immediately after took 18 months because the technology had changed. It wasn't just steel, they've got electricity. All their tools are now power tools. They're power chiseling everything. Elevators. Elevators run along, electricity. So everything is changing, all of these technological advancements, which actually kind of like now with everything that's changing so fast. And so
Is this on the upper left? That's the Frick house.
Yep.
That took 18 months to build.
Took 18 months to build. Yeah.
Okay.
All structural steel. It's all just stone cladding. Because they had the technology and the money to do it.
And Frick had a house, but he decided he needed a better house.
No, so it's a fascinating story with Frick. So he's living in Pittsburgh because it's Carnegie, it's U.S. Steel, J.P. Morgan brokers the deal to create U.S. Steel, makes Carnegie the wealthiest man in the world. Frick gets a big portion of that, but he has this tumultuous business relationship with Carnegie, and he moves to New York, and he rents one half of a building that was called the Vanderbilt Triple Palace, which was on Fifth Avenue. And he walked past this house as a kid with his best friend Andrew Mellon, and was like, one day I'm going to live in this house. And so he ends up renting this house, and he's happy living there. Until one day he takes this carriage ride through Central Park, gets off at 96th Street, comes down Fifth Avenue, and they pass by what is now the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Museum, big Georgian mansion with gardens. And he says to his driver, whose house is that? And they go, well, that's Andrew Carnegie's new house. And they're huge rivals. This is an area of one-upmanship. And so he's like, you know what? I'm going to build a house that is bigger and better than his. And so that's what spurred him into building the Frick Mansion, what became the Frick Collection. And by the way, the Carnegie house that you're showing there, that was so unusual because up until this time, houses weren't surrounded by gardens. They built the house all the way up to the sidewalk because they wanted to maximize the real estate value. So for somebody to surround the house by gardens meant they must have had so much cash, which, Carnegie did. And so when Frick builds his house, what does he do? He surrounds it with a garden. So he builds his mansion, not because he needs it, but he builds it just to stick it to Andrew Carnegie. And towards the end of their lives, Carnegie wants to patch things up with Frick. And so he sends his secretaries off to see Frick's secretaries, to see if he'll meet with them. And Frick's famous response was, you can tell Carnegie, I'll meet him in hell. And so they died hating each other still.
Wow.
Go ahead, Roberto. I know you got questions.
Well, actually, that Cooper Hewitt, I walk by that every single day because my daughter's school is right beside it.
So the two of the buildings in the book are right opposite. So we have both buildings which are part of Sacred Heart.
Sacred Heart is also another, beautiful structure.
So the Otto Kahn mansion is right down the corner of 91st Street, and then right next to it is the James Burden mansion, and a little bit further down the street is the Russian consulate, in what was in the old Hammond mansion. So that one block is one of the best blocks in New York City, with original buildings right there, along with the Carnegie Mansion.
Can I ask you something? Some of these places, I mean, if you look in the history, like the Schwab House, which was enormous, but only lasted for maybe 30 years, and then it was destroyed. And then another one, there was another huge mansion that was at like 65th and 5th, where now there is a synagogue there. But there was another extraordinary mansion there that was only there for like 30 or 40 years. That's it, if that. Like, how did these people just invested all this money to make these things, and then they would just get destroyed?
So I'll back into that, right? So old money used to live in brownstones. That was so the Astors were old money. J.P. Morgan was old money. And if you go to where the Morgan Library is, you can see the brownstone on the north side of the property. There was 3 of them that were identical. The one that's still there was his son's house. But that's how old money lived. And that's how Mrs. Astor lived. Her house was on 5th Avenue, the corner of 34th Street. And that's now where the Empire State Building is.
Yeah.
Right? But next door to where she was another brownstone where her nephew lived. And when Caroline Astor, Mrs. Astor, when her husband died, her nephew thought that he's the oldest Astor, so therefore his wife should be Mrs. Astor. And it's like this modern day trademark infringement row. Caroline Astor refuses to give up the title. And so out of spite, again, he knocks down his brownstone and he builds the original Astoria Hotel. Or the Waldorf, built the original Waldorf Hotel, sorry. Literally casting a shadow over her house. So she moves uptown to where the Temple Emmanuel now is.
Exactly.
And builds the Astor Mansion there, gets Richard Morris Hunt to design the Astor Mansion there. Astor then knocks down hers and builds the Astoria. Those two combine, the Waldorf and the Astoria, to become the Waldorf Astoria. They get knocked down, replaced with the Empire State Building. But the big Astor Mansion, where Temple Emmanuel is, that was a duplex. Half of it was for her and half of it was for her son, John Jacob Astor IV, who famously died on Titanic. And
Oh, wow.
2 of the rooms in there you can find down in Sarasota, because as they were knocking these homes down, John Ringling of Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey fame, he was buying everything for pennies on the dollar and shipping it down to his home down in Florida. So there's 2 whole rooms from the Astor Mansion inside the John and Mabel Ringling Museum down there. He salvaged the chandelier from the Waldorf Astoria before they pulled that down. He bought the entire contents of the Gothic room for Marble House from Alva Vanderbilt. And so there's a lot of Collis Huntington's house, which is where Tiffany now is. A lot of that was salvaged and taken down to Florida. So some people did. A lot of it just wasn't just like, torn out. But I started to answer this and I got sidetracked. Sorry, but what happens is they've got no. The thing that brings an end to everything is income tax. So all of a sudden they're not as wealthy as they used to be. The First World War, a lot of their staff perished, aren't able to come back. And so they can't maintain these houses. These houses are too expensive and they've not got the workforce to maintain these homes. The ones in New York, they realize that they're sitting on this huge amount of, the land's worth a fortune. And so they all move off to apartments and for the most part, they get knocked down and get replaced by nondescript buildings. Sometimes a nice building replaced it, but for the most part, that's not the case. And so the other famous thing, by the way, is they always say that, the Vanderbilts are a great example. So the Commodore Cornelius Vanderbilt makes a fortune. His son William Henry Vanderbilt doubles the fortune. And then the third generation squander it. They're the ones who blow through the fortune. By the 1970s, there wasn't one millionaire Vanderbilt left, which is pretty amazing considering when William Henry Vanderbilt died, he left 900 million in that money. I don't know what that would be now. They just blew through it. And that third generation of Vanderbilts are all trying to outbuild each other. So when you go up to Newport, you see the Breakers, you see Marble House, there's Biltmore in Asheville, North Carolina. There's Elm Court up in Lenox, in the Berkshires. There's the Vanderbilt Mansion up in Hyde Park on the Hudson. That's all built by this one generation, the siblings of each other. And just, yeah, it's very few of them, last, unfortunately.
Yeah. Can I ask you something? So, you said that Frick Mansion was built in 18 months, but let's just say someone was to endeavor to do something like that today, where there's very little skill, labor to do that type of thing. And if the person who has come the absolute closest, in my opinion, to build anything like that was Ralph Lauren at 72nd and Madison. Have you seen that building?
Yeah. So there are the people out there to do it.
It has to be expensive, could be.
But it's expensive because nowadays these people are specializing in historic restorations. So there's still the people can still do things. So it's very interesting. A lot of it is stage set design. So you look
Is this it?
Yeah.
You look at these old mansions and you'll see like you'll see like something that looks like it's a marble column, and it wasn't. It was made out of scagliola, which was like plaster designed to resemble it.
But this was an extraordinary thing that he did to put that in that name, because it fits. Not that it's, you almost feel that it's, instead of it being metal, it's fiberglass or whatever, but it aesthetically suits. And I take my hat off for him to endeavor to do that in that location as opposed to doing something else.
But you can do it. It's just, it's not, there's I work with
that one's old, John. That one's across the street. That's on the southwest. That's on the southeast corner. The one the more modern one is on the southwest corner. That one.
That one.
No, to the left of that one. That's new. But well done.
You can, I think for me, with what I do as an architect, I'm a residential architect, and that's what writing books and giving lectures doesn't pay the bills. Being an architect does. And the school that I went to, I feel like if you've got a skill set, you have to pass that along, whether that be teaching, writing, lecturing. I think that's something you're required to do. I believe in that. But pretty much all my clients want homes that look on the outside, that look like they fit in with where they are. So if it's in Palm Beach, there we go. You're designing either in the Anglo-Caribbean style or you're designing in the Spanish Mediterranean style. And when we did this house, we were very lucky. We won 2 really nice awards for that. One is the Schuler Award, which they give 1 award per year in Palm Beach to the best new house. So it's not like there's lots of categories. And this is just up the road from Mar-a-Lago, right on the ocean. And the clients wanted the Spanish Mediterranean style. And when I went to get the award, they asked me what my first kind of take was. And I said, well, I didn't want to embarrass myself. I wanted to design a house that, because you're in the estate section, you're surrounded by homes by Meisner and Fazio and Wyeth. And I wanted this house to fit in. I wanted them to pat me on the back and say, you know what, you did a good job. And so that was the goal here with this. And so a lot of people drive past this house actually, and they think it's an old house, and it's not, it's brand new. Now on the inside, it's very different because people, I've got I think a lot more contemporary way of living nowadays. But on the outside, they want to fit in. And if I'm building here in Greenwich, that's what people want. Same thing in the Hudson Valley, that's what people want.
So let me ask you something, and Scott's on the call too. I'm just curious. So Scott, if someone comes to you and says they want to build that, is that something that you say, no problem? And for you, is it, are there limited numbers of people who can do that?
We're lucky enough in the New York, the greater New York area, that there's lots of there's still lots of skilled craftsmen and workmen. So that's not something that's outside of our bailiwick. Stucco's not done as much. So we only have like 2 or 3 different guys that we'd use for a massive stucco job. There's a couple guys that aren't familiar with tile on the roof. So we'd end up using, the right guys. You want to get the right metal guys, and we can get that. But there's plenty of good craftsmen around here that can end up doing that if you know where to look. So, I mean, if you haven't done this before, a lot of those craftsmen may not work for you. So that's one of or they may, even worse, they'll say they'll work for you and then they won't actually show up, which means we'll send you one guy.
I'm assuming it's expensive because there's few people who do these things.
Yeah, and the cost of construction has gone up both due to normal inflationary matters, and then plus people actually like really nice stuff. And so the more you get back to some of the really cool traditional details, as opposed to ordering something off of a catalog, the more it's going to cost. I mean, and the more detailed, the more beautiful, or, paradoxically, the minimalist detail is actually one of the most expensive. But, a lot of the real classical stuff is, and actually one of the nice parts is many of the craftsmen get very excited about it. I mean, if they're getting to do real restoration stuff, a lot of the guys are like, well, this is really cool. This is what I really like to do. And a lot of them actually know the history and they're able to talk to the architects and designers about it and really love it.
That's great.
Is it a trend, Philip? Is it a trend, Scott, where people are saying, I've made plenty of money, I want to make an architectural statement. And the best way to do that is I want something with heft, gravitas. I want columns. I want stone, not shingles. I want an important house. Are you getting more of a call for that since we've gotten shows like the Gilded Age, and you've got things to admire in New York? You've got the Metropolitan Museum. I'm sure they said we need functional space, but give us neoclassical architecture on the outside, because we have to convey that this is an everlasting and important building. Are you getting a calls for important buildings, important architecture?
So, I mean, I think there's a big difference between residential work versus civic or commercial work, right? And I think when it comes to residential work, and it's no different than these homes that were built in the Gilded Age. These homes were built for entertaining. There was a very formal way of how they entertained, how they went from one room to another room to another room. After dinner, the gentlemen would go one way, the ladies would go another, and then they would reunite afterwards. And so those homes were very much designed for that. They were also designed for the bedroom layouts, so that the single men were kept separately from the single women. And more especially, the single men were kept away from the female staff, because there was all sorts of proprietary stuff involved with that. So if you go up to Stadsburg, which is just north of Hyde Park, that's where the Mills Mansion is. And the Mills Mansion is by Stanford White, or is enlarged by Stanford White. And that is the inspiration. That house is said to be the inspiration behind Bellamont from House of Mirth. And those bedrooms were laid out that way. So the whole house was designed for a particular way of how people lived. And that's no different than new houses now. The difference is most people, and most, it's not everyone, most people now are much more informal with how they live. In the before, I think, not that long ago, these classical homes, for example,
If I want to live informally, I can go buy a used house somewhere.
no, but
I'm
what,
gonna hire Phillip James Dodd and Scott Hobbs to
no,
make
but
me
what,
an important house.
no, but what I mean by that is, um, there was a certain style of architecture that what people were drawn to before. There was a European style that was symmetrical, whether that be Georgian, colonial, even a French chateau. There's a symmetrical facade with a front door in the middle, and the rooms were dispersed that way. Houses don't really work that way anymore because there's not that equal disbursement of rooms. It's all offloaded to one side because you've got the family room, you've got the kitchen next to the family room, you've got the breakfast room off the family room, you've got the mudroom off there. And then what you got on the other side? A living room, maybe if somebody wants it, or a study. So what happens is your floor plans are more going towards asymmetrical styles of architecture, which is arts and crafts. It's styles that are more romantic. So down in Florida, for example, the Spanish Mediterranean style fits very well with that because it's this romanticized notion of that. Anglo-Caribbean, not quite so much. You've still got a symmetrical front facade, but then you have to balance it with wings, or you do something that I do, which is called vernacular progression, where you kind of tell this story of it was an old building that's been added onto, that it grew and it got attached to the barn, or it grew and got attached to the stables. And that's why it's offloaded on one side. But it looks like it's a manor house with separate additions. So you kind of, you're trying to tell a story. And I think that's one of the things that I've evolved as a designer. I used to call myself a classicist, and then I called myself a romanticist. And now I say I'm just a storyteller. And you're telling stories of how, creating the backdrop. So for me, designing a house is very similar to writing a book or producing a TV show. It's storytelling, especially when it comes to a house.
So what I've learned is that Vanderbilt, who had a house, decided he was going to express himself. He was going to build a bigger house because times were changing and he needed it to function differently in New York. And he built his mansion. But again, it only lasted 20, 30 years, and then it was replaced. So they were very much designed and conceived of the time for the time.
Yes.
They were not meant to last hundreds of years.
No, for them, when they were building, that was contemporary architecture for them. They did not think of it as being a historic structure that was going to last. Now, nowadays we're like, oh my God, how can you think that? But no. And you got to remember, these homes may have been expensive, but it was a fraction of the amount of money that they had. And so it's, I remember very early on when I first came over to the States and I was working for somebody else, and we were doing a large house for somebody. And I remember like, oh my God, this is so much money. And then somebody said, well, yes, except he's got a painting that's worth more than this house. And so everything is relative. And so people, choose to spend their money how they choose to spend their money. And, again, I've had clients who come to me and they're like, I want a house that's bigger and better than his. That's how some people choose to do things. Other people don't care about that. It's, but
They're that up front with you. They're just like, look, Jim has a house down there. Mine's got to be better.
Yeah. Yeah. After you've signed an NDA with them, that's why I'm not saying any names here, but that's what it is. It's like, yeah, it was competitive back then, just like Frick built his mansion to stick it to Carnegie. That's what people, and if you look at it really, society is very similar now to what it was back in the Gilded Age. I mean, there's monopolies. Google or Amazon are no different than what Standard Oil was back then. The only difference is back then there was a president who was trying to break up the monopolies, and now no one's trying to do that. Politics is exactly the same, except 180 degrees. One of the early chapters in that in the last book is what is the National Arts Club. It was Samuel Tilden's house, and Samuel Tilden got 51% of the popular vote in the election of 1876 and lost the Electoral College by a single vote, the Rutherford B. Hayes. People think of that as a modern day occurrence when they think of Hillary Clinton and Al Gore, but that's been going on for, that happened over 100 years ago. And so I think society is very similar now to what it was back then. I think the big difference is back then, these people, especially in older, as they got older, like Carnegie, like Morgan, they gave money to create cultural institutions like the Metropolitan Museum, like New York Public Library. And they didn't necessarily put their names on them. I think most wealthy people, I don't know how many wealthy people now are doing that. There's plenty of uber wealthy people building sports stadiums and putting their names on them. But there's the Stephen Schwartzmans of the world who are doing a lot, but there's not that many really.
Talk to me about the National Arts Club, the mansion we just saw, the Tilden Mansion or the Lotus Club. Have a lot of these Gilded Age mansions in New York found a second life as a club, and why? Because they were set up originally for entertaining, and that's what clubs do.
Yeah, I guess partly for that. So what happened is, Penn Station gets knocked down, and then that creates the preservation movement in New York City. And their first focus is to save Grand Central. And then after that, they start going down the list. Once they got to a point where they could start saving buildings, you're kind of at that point. So buildings basically just had to get to that point. And there's actually a big rush to knock buildings down during that time period. So one of the big architectural losses is when the Singer building was knocked down and replaced with what is the U.S. Steel building.
What era was that, when we were knocking down buildings as fast as we could before Jackie O got to us?
Yeah, so like in the 50s and the 60s, they were still knocking them down. It's, they were dubious landlords were letting them fall into disrepair so that they could, demolish them for being a safety hazard.
But that's when we got some of New York's fabulous mid-century modern buildings. The Seagram's building of 57. You had Owens, or Skidmore, Owens, and Merrill. You had some really great new stuff.
Lever House.
Yeah, great stuff replacing it.
And that's why I said sometimes there's this perception that old buildings are knocked down and replaced by rubbish, which is a lot of the time, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes where the Frick collection is now, that used to be the Lenox Library. And that was a spectacular building, but the Frick's a better building. And, if the Waldorf Astoria wasn't knocked down, we wouldn't have the Empire State Building. And so there's, New York's always developing, always improving. You roll your dice. Sometimes doesn't matter the style of a building. Shitty architecture, shitty architecture. And there's a lot of old buildings that may be old, but they're not great buildings. And I don't believe in saving a building just because it's old. You should save a building because it's a great building.
Where are we now? Are we saving everything old, or are we saving just the good ones? Where's preservation now?
Pretty much anything that's old in New York. Well, I don't know, but a lot of it's been landmarked, means you can't tear it down. It's so what happens is, I remember a couple of years ago I was interviewed for a project on the Upper West Side, which is all landmarked, and it was 2 adjacent townhouses. They wanted to extend it. That meant going down 7 floors. They couldn't go up, but they could go down into the ground. And that's
7 floors into the ground.
And that's what they ended up. And I remember when I interviewed him, I said, look, guys, that you need to hire a huge, I don't mind being the design architect, but you need to hire a big engineering firm who do hospitals, because that's kind of the engineering feat here.
Was that on 69th Street?
I can't tell you where it was.
Roberto, do I pay a premium for a good looking Gilded Age townhouse or building these days? Is that a premium, or are there plenty of them? And
They're as far as townhouses, there are not a lot of them. And the thing is, that a lot of these townhouses, when they turn over, whether were modernized at one point or not, a generation has lived there, so they need so much. They need so much renovation. You know, it's typically a complete gut job. The house that I sold on 82nd Street, the facade is very nondescript. The only thing that's original is the facade. Everything down into the ground, up, sideways, it's all brand new. So, you know, I think that happens a lot, but no one's building. Like, there's one apartment that I know of at 15 Central Park West. It's a penthouse, and the person spent something like $20 million renovating it, and they literally gold leafed. It looks like Versailles inside. And when they were renovating it, he said they were buying so much gold that they were going on the open market to buy gold by like the pound, because they were using so much of it. It's just like, it's an extraordinary thing, but no one's doing that, especially on the interiors anymore. Like, nobody. And if you buy something like that, it's just so singular. Here, I could actually send you like an old listing of it. Just
Well, John, are you able to pull up my website?
yes. So where to?
And go to the architect section, because I have it split up between architect or for speaker. Go to the architect section and scroll down a little bit. Okay, so that first image on the top left, that's all brand new. That's that used to be a porch, and we filled it in. And all of the paneling, the bookcases, that's all walnut. The fireplace is an antique that we purchased. And then a company called Hyde Park, who in New York did the vaulted plaster ceiling for us. And so you can build like that. Now, people, for the most part, don't want a lot of frou-frou kind of details, but some people do. And a lot of it depends, by the way, in New York City, a lot of it depends on the cultural background of people, where they're from.
Yeah.
Because it's you know, what somebody right now I have a client who's French, and that's what she wants. She wants her family room to look like it should be in Paris. So we're having a decorative plaster ceiling done. We're putting in a wood parquet floor. So everybody's very, you know, different with what it is that they want, and you know, you can do it. It's just, it's how much you're willing to spend. But for example, like
Philip,
that,
Scott, this paneling that I see that looks old, you're going to tell me that this is all new paneling.
That's all brand new, and actually that's quite inexpensive to do because the paneling is just surface mounted.
And is that what we do to make sure that we don't have massive unbroken planes, that we have to break it up, because a lot of these places are very large walls?
Well, this house was, so this house is in Stanford, and
Okay.
that's an existing part of the house. It didn't have tall ceilings, and so we were trying to cheat to make it look taller. And so you put the chair rail lower down to try and achieve that. You have the crown extend onto the ceiling to make the crown, all these little tricks to make the room appear much taller than what it is. So that, I mean, the most expensive thing in that image was the plaster crown. But everything else in there is pretty inexpensive from that point of view. Can you keep on scrolling down? I'll see if there's something else.
Wait, I got to ask Scott. So can I ask Scott Hobbs, can you give me Gilded Age on the cheap? He says I can get, you know, preformed plaster molds.
You can always get something on the cheap, but it's just like with design. I mean, the best money spent is having a very good design, because I mean, the costs are going to end up being about the same.
Okay.
But as far as, like, again, you can cheat on a lot of the details. People know, and it shows through. Now, if you're cheating in the nanny's bathroom or something, okay, that's fine. But you don't want to do this in your foyer and the entry, the grand entry, and the master bathroom and the kitchen and
If you
the
stop,
key
so if you
places.
stop there, John, for example, so that little butler's pantry that you're seeing
Uh-huh.
with the wine there, so that's all brand new. That's all custom hardware by a company called Nance, who are in Long Island.
Yeah, Nance. Are they the ones who do the doorknobs?
Yep. So
Yeah,
they did all of the knobs in this whole house. That door, we did it out of leather. It's good, you can't see it from this image, but there's a little window in it because that's what the old homes used to see, used to have, so the butler could look through the window to see if they'd finished eating dinner. And the fact that it's leather would dampen the sound so that they wouldn't hear what was going on in the kitchen. And that's all out of that's all tiger maple, and the mill workers in Norwalk. So there's there's a lot of people who can do this kind of stuff. The little doors, you can't really see it, but the door on the right of that is what we call a Harman hinge door. It's a special type of hinge on it so that it closes to make it look like it's a panel. So there's a lot of detail goes in. This little room cost infinitely more than what the dining room cost. Dining room was an inexpensive room. This was a much more expensive room to do.
So can I ask you a question? So the Gilded Age, just from a standpoint of like design during that time period, say 1870s to 1930, something like that. Like John, can you look at that? I just sent you a link to the plaza. There's an apartment in the plaza. It's like this to me would be Gilded Age, but it's more like it seems delicate. Whereas we've talked about a handful of things that seem they seem stronger and more masculine from some of the things that you've pointed out that were in the city at the time. Like, do they both qualify as part of the Gilded Age, or are they, is it more Greek influence? Is it Parisian? Is it Roman?
No, so what happens is, so going into this era, there's no architecture schools in America at all. There's no
Click on the picture, John. Click on the main picture, John, and it'll get bigger.
So there's no professional architects in America. And the first is a gentleman called Richard Morris Hunt. He's the guy who builds the mansions up in Newport. He designed the entrance to the Metropolitan Museum. And so he goes to Paris and he studies at the École des Beaux-Arts. And Beaux-Arts just translates as fine arts in French. And then after that, the floodgates open. Almost every architect from the era goes and studies in Paris. And when they're there, they learn about the architecture of ancient Greece, of ancient Rome, of the Italian and French Renaissance, of the Baroque periods. And then they learn about medieval art. They tour and they see all the medieval architecture that's being built in England. And they come back to the States and they amalgamate all of this together. And they create what has become American Beaux-Arts. So on the interiors, two of the most popular styles are when they go and they do, Louis XV style, or Louis XVI.
Which is this?
Yes, that's what. So you see that a lot, especially in the latter part of it. The earlier part of it is still very Victorian. It's very heavy. They don't want that anymore. They want to go to a much lighter style of architecture. They're also traveling over to Europe, and they're staying in Paris, and they fall in love with this architecture. The nobility in Europe, especially in Italy, and there's not much left. It all had their heads chopped off in France. They're trying to sell the buildings, and so the Americans are just buying up entire rooms and bringing them back to New York and installing them. There's all of these shops. One of the reasons why the Frick was built so fast is there was about a dozen different companies in Paris working on it at the same time, and then shipping all the stuff over to New York where they're installed. And so each room would be very much its own particular style.
Yeah.
And so the libraries were much more robust because that was manly. That was where the men went. The drawing rooms tended to be much more French, because that's where the ladies would withdraw afterwards to have dinner. And so each room had a very different style. And you can see that if you go up to the Breakers. The Breakers is a great example. Each room is completely and utterly different.
Can we go back to your book? Can I ask you, who did you use as a photographer? Did you have one photographer that you just is your guy and you go to him every time, or gal?
So-
or do you have different people? Because the photography is incredible.
So it's what same person as my friend John Wallen. I've known John for donkey's years, and he used to be an architectural photographer. He's kind of retired now, and he's done a lot of books over the years. I did all the McKim and White books for Sam White, and I went to him and I said, look, this is what I want to do. Don't have any money. We get paid so little from the publisher, but I will get you into buildings that you've never been into. And he said, okay. And so
just like what Scott was talking about. Okay, I like this.
yeah, I was
and
so then I had to deliver. And so there's like 4 parts of putting together a book, or 5 parts. The first is coming up with an idea. The second part is you've got to then reach out to all the buildings to get permission, which is really difficult because some are easy to deal with, others are not. The third part is the photography, which is the easiest bit, or the funnest bit, I should say. Then the fourth bit is the writing and the research, or the research and the writing. And then the last bit is the design of the book, which you do not leave up to the publisher. You have to do it. Otherwise, you'll get an ugly book, right? And I obsessed over every page. I was able to get the publisher to do what I wanted because I wouldn't give them Julian's forward until I'd signed off on every page. But so there's a lot. So I'm doing 4 of those stages. And then on the photo shoots, I go and I'm the artistic director. I'll tell John what the image is that I want to see, what, because I'm putting the book together in my head. And with this book, we went to the Frick and they said, okay, well, we've never let anyone photograph. You have to use our photos. And I said, no, we have one guy. There has to be a sense of consistency. And so they said, okay, well, no. And so then we went to the university club, and they were the only ones I had to sit down and interview with them and impress them. And they said yes. And then after that, we went to the Morgan, and the Morgan said yes because the university club had said yes. And then we got a phone call back from the Frick saying, okay, we've heard the Morgan's in, so we'll be in. And so that's kind of how that works. And so we got to spend an entire day.
Did you tell the Frick at that point, you said, we have all our spots booked up?
It's like,
I love the idea that the Frick and Morgan are still talking to each other 100 years later.
Yeah. The interesting thing was with the new book on the mansions, it's a little different because this first book is like a great calling card. They know this book. They're like, okay, if it's anything like that book, we want to be in it. But then because I'm now in with the people up in Newport's at the very top, right? That's the pinnacle of this subject matter. So if you've been vetted by Newport and you've given their most prestigious talk, it means everyone else is like, okay, Newport's in, we're in. But we did have a few buildings who, before they responded to me, the first thing they did was phone Trudy Cox up in Newport, who's like, hey, this guy's reached out to us. And her response was, just do it. And so we only had one building turn us down for the second book. Everyone else was like, come on in. And then this is the great experiences. The Breakers is open every single day except for Christmas Day to the public. So how do you photograph a building that's got 4,000 people going through it on a daily basis? So we had to go up to Newport for a week, and we got in at 7 a.m. We had from 7 o'clock to 10 o'clock in the morning to shoot 5 days in a row to get everything done. And then during the day, we shot at Chateau Samir because they were closed for the season. And then in the evenings, we would go to the Elms after they had closed to the public and shot there from like 5 to 7 p.m. And that's how but you're in these rooms and you're used to seeing lots of people. There's a cordon normally you don't get to go over the other side of, and now you're walking through these spaces. Normally you're in the billiard room at the Breakers and there's a big, plastic box over it. And you're like, can you take that off? Sure, not a problem. They take it off. And so in some respects, that's the reason for doing books like this, because you get all of these great experiences that you know wouldn't. I mean, how do you get to do that? No one else gets to do this stuff.
But Philip, the objective here is you do the New York book, you do the Newport book, and then somebody says, design me the next breakers.
Well,
right?
yeah,
That's where we're going with this, right? Oh,
yeah,
clearly he's the expert. Can Philip design it, and can Scott Hobbs build it? I want the next Chateau sur Mer.
you know, I had a phone call, oh my gosh, a few years ago. I was actually doing a project in Bangalore in India for a very wealthy family who are kind of like Indians' version of a DuPont. And I'm doing a house out there for them. And while I'm out there, I get a phone call from from LA. And it's a Kuwaiti businessman. I'm dealing with it's his people. He wants to build his version of the Frick, and they want me to design his version of the Frick out there in Bel Air. And so it's like, okay, and I mean a gigantic budget. And so I'm talking with builders who can do it. You know, Scott would know a few of them. And then it just dies on the vine. And the way it was told to me was, you never want to work for billionaires, because billionaires do things on a whim. You want to work for millionaires, because millionaires are trying to become billionaires. And so
Scott will work for both millionaires and billionaires. Scott doesn't turn anybody down.
But you never know what's going to happen, and you know, all it takes is the right person who's got the right appreciation for things like this, because there are a lot of craftsmen out there who can do this. We can I don't, are you able to pull up I know we're running out of time. Are you able to pull up my website again?
Sure.
And go to the author section? And I'll tell you when to stop scrolling. You go down. I want to get to a shot of the university club and the library in the university club. Okay, keep on going. Keep on going. It's the little one there on the, just up a bit. You went past it. Oh, no.
That?
Back. If you go return, if you go, oh, no.
I screwed up. All right.
Screwed up. That's in the architecture section now. Go. Yeah, keep on going down. That's it right there. It's on the left-hand side. It's right above Grand Central. Right. So I'm often asked, what is my favorite room in New York City? That's my favorite room in New York City. The library in the University Club. And I remember the first time I went there, it was for an award ceremony. And afterwards I was stood there. And I was working at the time for a couple in New York City. And I remember just looking at it, and I turned around and one of my bosses was there. She was stood next to me, and she said, "What do you think?" And I remember saying something to her really prophetic, like, "Wow." And she looked at me and she said, "Well, it's nothing we can't do." I remember thinking, you are absolutely delusional if you think you can do this. And I still think that. But there is some stuff we can do. Maybe not as good as that. But a lot of this can be replicated. But you have to have a little bit of hubris and realize, I mean, that's just spectacular.
I think that's a great way to end the show. You've got to have a bit of hubris, but you've really got to respect the fact that some of this cannot be reproduced. It is perfection, and it will always be the best of its kind forever.
Yeah. And there's more of it than, I mean, I'll give you an example. So the new book, we're going to have 15 mansions in it. There's another 15 we could have put in. And maybe if I don't feel, you know, after it comes out, maybe we might do a second book. We'll call it The Palaces of the Gilded Age and have the other 15 mansions in it. But when you start off, people are like, how are you going to find 15 mansions? And it's like, there are more of these buildings, whether they be mansions or whatever, from what you think of. And I think with, you know, with this last book, the Beaux-Arts book in New York City, one of the great things about it was, yes, we had landmarks that everybody knows, like the Metropolitan Museum and Grand Central Terminal and New York Public Library. But we also had buildings that people didn't know about. A lot of people didn't know about Grant's Tomb, or they didn't know about the Soldiers and Sailors Monument. Almost nobody knows, unless you go to have a steak at Peter Luger's, nobody knows about the Williamsburg Savings Bank right opposite. Nobody knows about Woodlawn Cemetery, which is the last chapter in the book, and all the mausoleums that are there. So there's more of it out there than what you think. And so it's
Sounds like a whole lot of books coming out.
yeah, and you know, I think if the TV show The Gilded Age does anything, is I think it's made people realize that there is this type of architecture in this country, and that it's not something that you can only find in Europe. There's plenty of it here. Maybe not quite as big as Blenheim Palace, but there's still plenty of it here.
And a lot of it's public, and I can go visit.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. This has been a
Yes.
really great show. This has been episode 160 of Boroughs and Burbs. On that, again, remind you, gracefarms.org, go visit them. And I want to thank our host. Let's go back to there he is, Phillip James Dodd of Bespoke Residential Design, and you can look him up in Greenwich. Is it Greenwich, Connecticut, that you have an office?
Yep, my office is right downtown Greenwich, and yeah, please do check out my website, which is just my name, phillipjamesdodd.com, 2 L's in Philip. And yeah, look at that. I've got a quote there from the king. How many people have that?
Thank you, Philip. That was amazing.
Thank you
very much.
Take care, guys.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. See you next week. Boroughs and Burbs, episode 162.
Bye-bye.